Oh, yeah, it's that time. Wednesday, 11 a.m. Eastern Time, here at the Voice of College Football, Buckeyes Talk. Tony Girdman's right next to me. Buckeye Huddle. Buckeye Weekly is the podcast. And right here on YouTube is the Venture College Football Playbook. So check them all out. Again, BuckeyeHuddle.com. Buckeye Weekly is the podcast. Steve Helwagen, the mainstay, 247 Sports Bucknuts. How are we doing today, guys?
Doing great.
Calm before the storm. I hope you're getting in whatever rounds of golf or just hanging out on the patio or whatever it is for you, because I know you guys were going to go full throttle until what? Maybe Ohio State's knocked out of the Final Four next April.
Well, God willing, I mean, if they make the Final Four in both sports, that'd be outstanding. We've had that happen before in one calendar or one school year, but no, I actually got out of town this past weekend, went up to Milwaukee to track my hard-charging first-place Cincinnati Reds, and saw a loss on Friday night and then a incredible victory on Saturday with a 3-run home run by Joey Votto. And the rookie sensation, Ellie De La Cruz, stole second base, third base, and home in a span of about 2 pitches. And even the Brewers fans were high-fiving us on that. So Reds went into the break 1 game ahead of the Brewers, and they'll play the Brewers again 3 games this weekend in Cincinnati. So that's got my entire mind and focus, and none of this college football crap means nothing. No, I'm just kidding. Yeah, just kind of a fun thing. My thing on the Reds, I grew up in the 70s and they were world champions in 75, 76. And then again, in my senior year of college in 1990, when I graduated that year in 1990, they won the World Series, and that was awesome. Got to go to a World Series game that year. And really since then, it's kind of been a lot of famine, in the 33 years since then. So for them to get me to the start of football season and keep me pretty well occupied, I think this has been a successful year, but obviously it'd be great if they can take it into October. So we'll see how that goes.
Sometimes when the Big Red Machine is brought up, I think of when I was first getting into baseball, and it was when we would write book reports back in, 4th grade, 5th grade, and my teacher would have to steer me off of, you can't just read all sports books, everything's a sport, but I would read these. I would try to pass them off as book reports.
That's all that matters.
That's all that matters. The thing that, and I'm the type personality, and at that point in my life where I went from 1 year, I didn't know anything about baseball, didn't follow it. And then boom, something got me into it. And then I'm memorizing every statistic in the world, and I'm watching every game and doing everything I possibly can, buying every baseball card. But they used to have these books, and they would print them every year. Major League Baseball All-Stars of 1976. And my first recollection was, it was like the All-Star lineup was basically like Steve Garvey at first base, and then the rest of it was the Reds lineup.
Pretty much.
It was pretty much back in those days. And yes, I miss those days. I was just telling somebody yesterday, I was on a Twitter space. People were asking me questions on Twitter space yesterday, and I said, yeah, I was the nerd who wasn't satisfied with the statistics that were printed in Sunday's paper, Major League Baseball stats. I would take Saturday's box scores because those only went through Friday. And I would take, Dan Driesen went 1 for 4, and I would add it and do the calculator. I had a calculator. He went from 277 to 276. And I'd write this big, long log of baseball statistics every Sunday afternoon. Yes.
That's what I probably did the same.
Tony, we'll finally get to you. How you doing?
Good. I know Steve going off to Milwaukee. I also, meanwhile, just woke up from a nap 30 minutes ago. So we've all been busy. We've been doing our own things and enjoying a little bit of as you said, the calm before the storm and Big Ten Media Days. I believe we'll probably be leaving in about 2 weeks, Steve? Is that about right? Just getting in the car and
2
hopping
weeks
in the jet.
Yesterday, we'll be driving out to Indianapolis. I know we're having dinner one night while we're there, and going to make quite a time of it. And OSU's people will be speaking 2 weeks from today, so mark that on your calendar.
I had my version of almost a daily nap. alarm went off at 8 and I laid in bed until 9:30. So that's usually what happens with me. Tony, we got a couple targets for the Buckeyes. One would be Jayden Jackson, defensive lineman, and the other Edwin Spillman, a linebacker, who have announced just here in the last day or two when they will make their commitment announcement. I always love these announcements to tell us when they're going to make their announcements, which then later could flip. But anyway, July 13th for Jayden Jackson, and then we've got Edwin Spillman on the 21st, and I'll let you take it away to anything that's on your mind or on your forecast concerning recruiting.
Yeah, it is kind of like a save the date for a wedding that may happen, and then there may be another wedding 2 months after that, and it's like, well, this kind of annuls the first wedding. But yeah, Jayden Jackson is a guy that Ohio State would certainly love to have. Defensive tackle at IMG, who is originally from Indiana, I believe. Sounds like it's a Texas-Ohio State battle at this point. He's really, if you watch his highlights, he gets into the backfield. Ohio State already has a commitment from five-star defensive tackle Justin Scott, but when you watch Jayden Jackson, he looks like a five-star as well in what limited action he's had. I think he's ranked he's a 3-star by 24/7 and a 4-star in the composite, but when you watch him and you look at his offer list, clearly anybody in the nation would take him. So that happens tomorrow. And from what I've gathered, like you talk to people about him, the people who do the recruiting reporters, they're like, it's odd because it's generally by now you have a pretty good idea, but I guess he's pretty close to the vest. And so they're not sure. And then also I think I may have been told you just also have to watch for Miami just coming around, like what happened with Marquise Lightfoot. Sometimes Miami's offer just comes in and it's like, okay, well, there you go. And we'll see if that one sticks. But yeah, so he could be a Buckeye, but I think maybe most people, and I don't even know if there's any actual crystal balls. There's none on 24/7, but I think the winds may be blowing to Texas, but we shall see.
Yeah. Jayden Jackson, number 446 overall in the country, 6'2", 300-pound defensive lineman, and would help obviously at the defensive tackle position for the Buckeyes. Looks like, according to 24/7, he made official visits here in the month of June, 4 of them. At least he was scheduled to make 4 of them. I guess he would have only made a couple of them. Ohio State, Florida, perhaps he's visited, and then Miami and Texas are his other schools. So making his announcement tomorrow, it seems like Ohio State's as well positioned as anybody for him. They have got a number of guys. I just jotted down. Bill Kurlick from our site did a story with, 6-7 guys that are having announcements upcoming. There's a defensive back, Brandon Jacob, on July 20th, a defensive back, Corian Gibson, on July 22nd, and then 4 really primetime names. These are all national top 100 players who the Buckeyes are either favored or co-favored, right alongside for these guys. And that's the linebacker Kyngstonn, Viliamu, Asa from California. He's going to announce on July 23rd. Ohio State, USC, and Notre Dame are his top schools. The defensive back, Aaron Scott from Springfield, Ohio, July 30th. Ohio State, Michigan, and Oregon. We can talk about him in just a minute. I know that your comrade Kevin Noon was in touch with him yesterday at a camp in the Dayton area, and we can maybe get an update on that. The defensive back, KJ Bolden from Georgia, August the 5th. Ohio State or Georgia seem to be the top 2. Most people have him crystal balled to Georgia because his feet are in the state of Georgia currently, I believe. But our Bill Kurlick seems to think Ohio State's got an outside shot at that one. And then a defensive end, Edric Houston, on August the 22nd. Most people have crystal balled him to Ohio State. He's like a national top 40 player. And one more guy, defensive end, Dylan Stewart, the number 13 overall player from the Washington, D.C. area. A lot of people think that Ohio State is the team to beat on him, but I don't have a date specifically. If they're able to get 3 or 4 of these 5 or 6 guys that we just ticked off, then they're going to achieve what we have all been dying for, which is more blue chip talent on the defensive side of the football, and improve the bottom line on that side of the ball. So that's kind of what is out there in the next several weeks. If Jim Knowles, Ryan Day, the defensive staff can close the deal on some of these guys, how big it would be for the Buckeyes, in 2024, 2025, 2026 in particular. Those seasons would be impacted by these players. Tony, I referenced this. I don't know. Did you read Kevin's report on the Aaron Scott matter? And I guess he was wearing Michigan-styled Nike cleats at the camp yesterday, which created a bit of a buzz for everybody there. I don't know what came out of that from our buddy Kevin's report.
Yeah, Aaron Scott says he's still undecided, even though he has a decision date coming. So that's where he is right now. I do think he probably saw all of the talking on social media about how much his dad is a fan of the Buckeyes, and he scheduled his commitment date for his father's birthday, and that everybody just assumes that he's an Ohio State guy now. So I think when you are that in tune to the game, you also play the game in terms of the recruiting game. And so I think he wanted to keep people talking, and not that he isn't torn. I'm sure he is, but if you want to keep people talking, then you start to boost up the other team. I will say when Ohio State had a commitment from Miles Lockhart on Instagram Live, and Aaron Scott was in there, rooting him on to Ohio State. So things like that it's, with recruiting, the tea leaves are all over the place, and most of them mean absolutely nothing, and some of it means something, but you can't tell which tea leaves are the accurate ones and which ones are, just regular tea, I guess. So, if you want to believe one side, believe that. If you want to believe the other, believe that. But he says he's still torn, and we'll find out in a few weeks here where he's going to go. But as I've said before, Ohio State, this would be a big loss for them if he went to Michigan, to lose not only one of the top players in state, but to lose them to Michigan.
And one other thought, his school colors at Springfield are blue and gold. So, it could be, he's wearing that motif because that may be a shoe that he wears to, accent his high school uniform in the fall. But again, who knows? But I wouldn't read a whole lot into the color of somebody's, cleats on July 11th of what that's going to mean one way or the other.
We talk Buckeyes with all of you each and every Wednesday, 11 a.m. Eastern Time. Tony Gerdeman, Buckeye Huddle, Buckeye Weekly is the podcast. Steve Helwagen, Bucknuts 247 Sports. You see the ticker. We've got an Amazon link. You can help us grow the channel. Doesn't change your shopping experience at all. Doesn't cost you a penny. Please use the link. We've got a recruiting-related question coming in from Peace Clan. We could use more of that. I have not heard much at all on Dominick McKinley, 5-star defensive lineman from Louisiana. Does anyone have a read on him?
There hasn't been much talk about him as much as there have been the other defensive linemen. He took an official visit to Ohio State, one of 4 back in June. It's been 20 years since Ohio State has landed a defensive lineman out of Louisiana, the last being Nader Abdallah back in 2004. And I'll believe it happens when I see it, because I just don't see pulling a guy from one of these southeastern states and pulling a defensive lineman, a coveted defensive lineman out of the southeast states that isn't Florida. I wouldn't expect it. Like, I would never expect it out of Alabama. I would never expect it out of Louisiana, basically, is what I'm saying. And so we'll see. He took official visits to Ohio State, Oklahoma, Texas, and Texas A&M. So when you look at that, yes, Oklahoma and Texas are now SEC schools, but you would expect maybe some more southeastern Georgia, Alabama, stuff like that. So maybe they can get him. But then you also see that LSU is one of those teams. And so, good luck.
Yeah. I like his school list. He's hit all the ones there in his area that are really good. with LSU, Texas A&M, and Oklahoma. He's not, I figure it's going to be one of those four is probably where he's going to land. The funny story about you mentioned they haven't had a guy from Louisiana since 2004, Nader Abdallah, a big defensive tackle. He really, I think in his 5th year, he finally played a little bit for the Buckeyes. And it was during the election year, I presume it must have been 2004, somebody asked Troy Smith about the election, and Ralph Nader was making some noise in that election, and they asked Troy Smith, like, who are you rooting for in the election, Nader, whatever, and Troy Smith said, my main man Nader Abdallah. He kind of took it the wrong way, but yeah, it was kind of funny, but that's my one main memory about Nader Abdallah. I think there was something else that happened in his recruitment. It's in Bill Conley's book. Bill Conley recruited him out of Louisiana, and something about a ship was docked in the New Orleans Bay or something. And it was some kind of story about an international incident that was going down like right there in New Orleans. I guess probably for an episode of NCIS New Orleans with our guy Scott Bakula. But yeah, I don't know what happened, but those are about the only things I really remember about Nader Abdallah.
Well, it's a hell of a lot more than me, because I got to say, as soon as that name came out of Tony's mouth, I thought, oh my goodness, yeah, I haven't
the Wayback File
thought that name, said that name since whatever 2008, and absolutely for you guys to come up with information regarding Nader Abdallah. I've often thought, talking about nerd sports games, one would be you take a franchise and you play with a group of people and you have to name an individual from the all-time roster until, you run out and see who can last the longest. And, I would put my money on you two and Kevin, of course, for Ohio State football, because I would remember as soon as you guys said the name, everybody you named, I would have a recollection of everybody, but to come up with the name, that's a whole different level right there.
I think the better game would be you can't name any starters. It has to just be the most obscure names as possible. Like you get a name, you have to, figure out which team that guy played on, and whoever can come up with the most obscure names wins.
Absolutely. Another good one. All right, Peace Clan. This might be a bit extreme here. Peace Clan says, going back to Aaron Scott, if we lose him to the team up north, then something is certainly wrong with Buckeye recruiting in Ohio. I hate to make a narrative on one lost recruit.
Yeah, I mean, I was looking at Twitter last night, and there was a funny clip of Charles Woodson from the ESPYs, way back when. And it was the comedian
Norm Macdonald.
Remarked that the only way to lose the Heisman is to, kill your wife and a waiter or something like that live on the ESPYs. And that kind of went over like a bomb. But Charles Woodson is an example of a guy from Fremont, Ohio that went to Michigan. And there have been others. I mean, they had Desmond Howard was from Ohio, Charles Woodson, Elvis Gerbach, any number of guys over the years from the state of Ohio have gone to Michigan. But
that's when it was broken, Steve.
Yeah. In the last 20 years, anybody, Ohio State's wanted that's gone to Michigan, that list is very, very short. I mean, Kyle Kalis, was he committed to OSU and then went to Michigan for some reason? And I don't remember the whole reasoning why.
Luke Fickle and Urban Meyer, he was a 2012 guy. So that whole thing,
Yeah. In that
Trust getting fired.
Yeah, that whole thing where they changed staffs and brought in a new group of coaches and things looked at a different way between what Jim Bowman may have been doing on the offensive line. And then, who was the first offensive line coach for Meyer? Was it Warner? Was he in on the first wave or? Mm-hmm. Okay. So yeah, that may have been a difference in philosophy, but it's rare in the last 20 years that a guy Ohio State has offered and really wanted has gone to Michigan. So if it does happen once or twice in 20 years, I don't think it's a reason to say, what are we doing with our recruiting? Our recruiting is not right. Let's just tap the brakes. One guy isn't going to change the trajectory of either of these programs. And so let's just let the kid make his decision in peace and go from there. The last guy they had from Springfield, who I think they really, really, really wanted, was TreVeyon about a decade ago. Didn't he go to Alabama? Was that it, Tony? That sound right? I mean, they've had some other really good players. I mean, Wisconsin has had some players from there. I think the wide receiver Davis was from Springfield from there. And there have been some other guys, just general, Big Ten players, but, are they Ohio State Big Ten players? This may be the first one in a while. So let's just let the poor kid make his announcement, and wherever it happens, and it's all going to work out. We're all going to get up the next day. The sun's going to come up. They're going to get the helmets and the shoulder pads out. They're actually going to play football in the fall. It's not just a hot stove league of recruiting. They actually play football games in the fall, believe it or not. So I think any cause to get too wrapped around the axle about one guy, I just don't get it, and I don't see it.
I think there will be, if Aaron Scott chooses Michigan, you'll be able to possibly look at the Ohio rankings in the 24/7 and see that 2 of the top 3 guys went to Michigan, maybe 3 of the top 4 if Brian Robinson goes to Michigan. I'm not sure that he has a committable offer to Michigan anymore or not. So you look at the list of Ohioans and see a lot of Michigan. Of course, Robinson doesn't have an offer from Ohio State. They lose Jordan Marshall from Cincinnati to Michigan, but Ohio State has 3 running backs committed in the class, so they've kind of picked up those pieces. But I think narratively it would look there. You'd see a lot of discussion on Twitter about it, and as we know, that's where that's more important than what happens on the field, is what people are saying on Twitter. But yeah, you've got Bryce West locked in, and those 2 have talked about wanting to play together. So I think whichever way Aaron Scott goes, that flips the narrative. And as Steve said, we'll see what kind of impact it has on the field. You look at some of the guys that Ohio State has lost. Some Ohioans that have gone to Michigan, in the past, that hasn't necessarily been devastating to Ohio State. But then you got guys like Rod Moore, who is a safety in Michigan. I think he's going to be a junior this year that Ohio State didn't really offer. And he's going to be like a 3-year starter at Michigan, and is really, really good. So it's good that Jim Harbaugh is back to recruiting Ohio and recruiting Ohio well. It's something that he got away from, and you saw the results on the field when he did.
Yeah, Peace Glenn, it's not as though you don't have a point there. Certainly, we had this discussion 2, 3, 4 months ago when Michigan was making inroads in the Buckeyes state, unlike anything under the Harbaugh regime, in which they had not signed a top 10 player in the state of Ohio during his entire tenure at Michigan, and now they have. So it's not like it's completely not justified for you to make that statement. However, yes, the recruiting is still just to point out the selections of certain players. I think that obviously the world is wide open for guys to do what they will for whatever reason. Now getting to this year's team, there are a couple questions concerning the defensive side of the ball. For example, we got Drowsy Dragon, who's more likely to have a bigger impact on defense this year. Well, certainly concerning the All-America teams, you would think JT Tuimoloau versus Jack Sawyer, but also having a, more importantly, top 5 defense.
Steve, why don't you go first?
Yeah, bigger impact on defense this year, Sawyer Tuimoloau. Well, I mean, Tuimoloau has shown a little bit more in his first 2 years than Jack Sawyer did. And, that can mean something, or it may not mean anything at all. It could mean that Jack Sawyer is ready to explode this year as a junior and ready, to live up to a lot of the rankings that came his way out of high school, to be that kind of impact player. If the answer is both of them, which, you can't have one guy have a bigger impact than the other, and have the answer be both of them. But I think that that would be what suits most Ohio State people fine, because if they're both bringing heat off each edge, how do you account for that? I mean, you can't put an extra tight end on both ends to block them. Then you'd only have two guys on the pattern, and that's not going to work. So, I think that as long as they get good, consistent pressure up front and can impact games a little bit more than they have the last couple of years, that's what we're looking for. That's what because the tone is set up front. The games are won and lost up front, and that's stopping the run, containing the run, and then pressuring the passer and making the quarterback make mistakes, force the quarterback into negative plays, and get deflections, get punch outs, all these things. I made a comment. I was on the radio here in Columbus this morning. I was asked, who's the one guy you want to see play this year, that you're curious you want to see play? And I said, TreVeyon Henderson, probably just because he was banged up at the end of the year. And had he been healthy, I think the end of the year changes dramatically how the Michigan game and the Georgia game play out, because his availability just changes the entire dynamic of the game. Kind of like Ellie De La Cruz, that speed we referenced at the start of the show with the Reds, that speed factor just changes so much. I mean, I watched Milwaukee on a routine ground ball throw it away because the guy was rushing to get it over there. The same thing applies with Henderson. You get the ball, I know I'm off track on defense, but it all comes back around that, if on Henderson you take a bad angle or you take a wrong step, all he needs is a crease and he can go 70 in the blink of an eye when he's healthy. And we just haven't seen that out of him for the preponderance of his 2 years. So to me, that's important. And then I mentioned Sawyer and Tuimoloau as guys that I want to see. And with Tuimoloau, I referenced the Penn State game, which is probably the greatest single game any player on the defensive side of the football has ever played at Ohio State, if not number one, certainly in the top five, with everything he did to impact the outcome of that single game, and all the negative plays and setting up touchdowns, scoring a touchdown, everything else that he did was so incredible in that game. You don't look for him to play and have that kind of an impact every week, but what you do look for is for him to make one or two of those plays every week. That's the mark of a true All-American, somebody who is consistent and a consistent force in every game they play. Chase Young had that. Nick and Joey Bosa had that. We're looking for JT Tuimoloau and Jack Sawyer to exert that. Phil Steele has Tommy Eichenberg as a first-team All-American linebacker, and he watches all the games, scouts all the players, has them rated, has every linebacker rated 1 to 135 at their position in the country. I mean, this guy is meticulous with how he views every player who plays in a FBS game. He watches the tapes each week and rates the guys. So to me, that's pretty impressive to see that. And then on the back end, to add Davison Igbinosun and Jihad Carter, the transfers, to have Denzel Burke be healthy, all that, to me, it bodes so well for what this defense can potentially be. They've slammed the door on most of the teams they played last year. Maryland dinged them for 30 points, and that was that portended not good stuff the next two games, obviously, because they couldn't keep Michigan or Georgia out of the 40s. And that, as they say, was that.
Top five defense, I guess. What metric are we talking about? Are we talking about yards, talking about points? I think I always like to look at like yards per play to get a better idea. But I think you're going to have close to a top 10 defense, and they were close to a top 10 defense except for two bad quarters last year, one against Michigan and one against Georgia. Those two fourth quarters doomed them. This past week, I went back and looked at how many times last year, how many quarters did the Buckeye defense give up like more than 10 points in a quarter? And I believe it was 7 times. One of them was in a rout against Wisconsin. The other 3 were the three best offenses they played: Penn State, Michigan, and Georgia. So it's like you shut everybody else down, but you give up more than 10 points in half of your quarters against Penn State and Michigan and Georgia. So it's hard to paint that in a great picture. But if you just close those gaps, and I think that you will have that this year. I mean, second year in the defense, second year in the system for everybody. Jim Knowles has a better idea what everybody can do. So do the assistant coaches. So I'm expecting a top 10-ish type of defense. And a lot of that is also dependent on guys staying healthy. And they weren't able to do that last year. And I see a mention of Michael Hall, and he's one big reason. If he stays healthy, I think this is a much better defense. And in terms of who has a larger impact, JT Tuimoloau or Jack Sawyer, I remember that Penn State game. Everybody talks about that Penn State game. I think everybody, my thing with that is that was the outlier. That was not how JT Tuimoloau generally played. And so everybody points at that game and says, that's who he is. That's who he could be. It's not who he's been. So I'd like to see that expand. And I he's very talented. He's very good. Probably going to be a first rounder after this year. But, he had 4 sacks last year, and 2 of them were against Penn State. And so I'd like to see more consistency out of him, but also, they schemed against him a little bit last year. Opponents did. And so if you've got Jack Sawyer, who is now focused solely on defensive end, doesn't have to worry about playing Jack, can just do what he came to Ohio State to do, rush the passer. I would expect his numbers to go up and his impact to go up considerably. And then who has the most impact? I'll say whoever is next to Mike Hall the most. Whichever defensive end is playing next to Michael Hall, I think will have the biggest impact, because either of those guys next to him creates an issue for an offensive line.
You partially answered this, Tony, but I'm still going to extend the conversation. So I skimmed through that Penn State game just the other day, and I don't typically do that, but for whatever reason, it came across my path, and I skimmed through the key spots. And obviously, that kind of game is an outlier for anyone, because some of that has to do with opportunity. You're not a running back who gets handed the ball 22 times a game. You're a defensive end. Where's the ball? How much are you double teamed? All those things. And obviously he took great advantage of those opportunities, but it's just astounding what he did in that game. It just resonated again. And I relived oh, wow. It's just the plays that he made in that game. Were there pockets of other games that mattered, or did he just take advantage of a bad matchup? And again, the opportunities have to come. The ball was in the air in his direction a few times where he made the right move on the ball, one an interception, one a deflected pass. But in regards to, can you think of pockets where it was like, okay, well, there he is in other games?
Not really. And you look at his numbers, and he had 11 tackles for loss last year. 1 each in the first 3 games, and then 3 against Penn State. He had 2 against Michigan. Does anybody remember those 2 against Michigan? Because I sure don't. But he had sacks in 3 games last year. The other big pocket that I remember would be Michael Hall against Michigan State, playing in 8 snaps and getting 4 sacks, with one of those being taken away from him by a Zach Harrison penalty. That to me was incredible. Michael Hall again against Notre Dame, creating an impact for a span of time. But again, I think JT Tuimoloau is going to be just fine. It just feels like that Penn State game is what people think he was, or what they give him the benefit of the doubt. And I'm just saying, if he doesn't do that this year, people are going to start to get upset about their own bloviations that they had for him. So I don't expect him to have another 2 interception game, 3 tackles for loss, 2 sacks, 1 or 2 forced fumbles. I'm going to go out on a limb and say that, as Steve said, it was an all-timer. I think you could put that up there with Chase Young against Wisconsin in 2019, where he had like 4 sacks or whatever. That was the most dominating performance I've ever seen. This one, the Penn State game, may have been the single-handedly craziest domination. It was a different kind of domination. It was like he made every play that needed to be to be made in that game. And what was and you look at the score, and it was 44-31. That was the final score. It was much closer than that, and he put the distance on it.
Peace Clan is also bringing up Jim Knowles bending a little bit and coming to the approach of possibly implementing a slot safety to be just another cornerback of sorts. What's the rhetoric that's been out there?
Well, we didn't really see any of that in the spring, except for when Jihad Carter went down and they moved Jair Brown and Ryan Turner to nickel. That position has to be able to defend like a corner, but it also has to be able to handle tight ends and handle the run. Obviously, it has to be a position that can cover a slot receiver, and so there are going to be corner tendencies. But for anybody saying like it should just be Denzel Burke, Jordan Hancock, and Davison Igbinosun, we didn't see that at all in the spring. Those three guys stayed on the outside exclusively. The only two corners that went on the inside were Jair Brown and Ryan Turner, and I think Jair Brown, I've said it since before I saw him there, I think he could do very well there. So, that may occur, but right now they really like Cam Martinez. They really like Jihad Carter. And so, we'll see in fall camp if we get to watch any practices in fall camp, and that's always an iffy proposition. I know they've talked about it, but like I said, the only things we've seen of that in action would be Jair Brown as the number 2 nickel once Jihad Carter went down, and Ryan Turner as like the number 3 nickel after that as well.
I do believe we're going to have a third corner on the field at various times, maybe in certain, third and long pass situations where they have to put an extra receiver on the field in those situations to get downfield. So I think that you will see it from time to time, and it may very well be the third guy between Igbinosun and Hancock and Burke. You didn't see it at all last year because they rarely had 2 healthy corners to begin with to even think about putting a third one out there. I mean, Jair Brown got a little bit of run here and there, but mostly in relief of one of the starters. So he may have even started a game at some point in there just
Game
because
4.
Yeah, they were so thin with guys getting dinged up last year. So I think you will see it at times, but I don't think it becomes the base. I think that's more of an exotic situation. I think that you would go to in a specific situation on the field, down in distance, however you want to put it, maybe red zone, I don't know. But the coaches, Jim Knowles has coached a lot of football. And I think that the resonating fact comes back on Jim Knowles is there were a lot of people who watched him at Duke and Oklahoma State said the first year will not be his best. And if last year is the worst he's going to do at Ohio State and they still went 11-2 and made the playoff, then I think we can all live with that. They said by the second, third, and fourth year, the scheme takes hold and the defense really starts to put the clamps on people. And his last year at Oklahoma State, I think they lost the Big 12 championship game. I think it was 21-16, I think was the final score. They lose to Baylor, get upset, I believe, in that championship game 2 years ago. And you give up 21 points, you ought to beat anybody that you play. So to me, I'm on board with Jim Knowles, and we'll see how it goes this year. But I'm emboldened by what others have said about the direction his defenses take.
Did somebody tell Ryan Day that it was going to take 2 or 3 years for Jim Knowles' defense to take hold?
I don't know.
I do remember Jim Knowles talking about how it took me like 5 years at Oklahoma State, and I know I don't have 5 years here. I don't have that long to do it here. You've got like 2 years, and yeah, we'll see. I do expect them to be much better. And Jim, get back to the nickel. I know Buckeye fans have their issues with Cam Martinez because of the Michigan game, and then a couple of other situations last year. But he was arguably the best player in the secondary in the spring, outside of maybe Denzel Burke. Like he was really, really good in the spring, making plays, pick sixes, and things like that. And you'll say, well, against bad quarterbacks, maybe. But he was out there making plays. Jihad Carter and Cam Martinez has also repped at cornerback throughout his career. to give you an idea. And then also Jahad Carter. I talked to an NFL scout last year. Their team was looking at him. They knew of teams that were looking at him as a corner as well. And he's got good size, 6 foot, 200. So he's played every single position in the secondary at Syracuse. So he has coverage skills as well. So they may not need to go to just a strict corner. And I do think if you're going to play, 14, 15 games or whatever, I expect all three of Jordan Hancock, Denzel Burke, and Davison Igbinosun to do some sort of rotating. Because if you have three starting corners and you have three guys that are good enough to start at Ohio State, you can't leave one of them on the sideline. And with as injury prone as those guys have been, you don't want to put too much on them. You want to give them some breaks. That was one of Kerry Combs' greatest contributions to Ohio State, not just the recruiting, but the way he rotated. And every coach since then and before then, like Jeff Hafley couldn't get, he didn't want to do it. And, Tim Walton hasn't been able to do it. You mentioned Jair Brown. He had to start the fourth game of his career because Ohio State was down Denzel Burke, Jordan Hancock, and Cam Brown. And so they started a true freshman and a redshirt freshman against Wisconsin last year. They've got better numbers this year. So I think you can afford to play more of them because, look what happened in the secondary down the stretch in November and in January, and see if that's what you want to happen again.
Tony, what is the good word at BuckeyeHuddle.com these days?
Pretty good. I just posted a story today about taking a closer look at Calvin Simpson-Hunt, the Ohio State true freshman corner. I've been doing a series of these, just looking at some highlights and some film of each of the new players coming in, new freshmen and new transfers. So you can find that there. Getting ready for Big Ten Media Days, trying to, it's an interesting time because you get to talk to all of the coaches. And so since you do, you got to come up with stuff to talk to them about. And I'm not sure what's going to happen with the Northwestern situation, the contingent in the Northwestern contingent, but I'm guessing it will free us up to talk to everybody else during those sessions because the line and the crowd around the Northwestern tables will be pretty immense.
Steve, you put together a top 25, so you do compile a media top 25 where you gather from different sources and do that each and every year. But this year, we've got a top 25 from you.
Yes, I did my own, and we can delve into it real quickly if we want, but that's the precursor for me to do the preseason consensus poll, where I take a lot of different polls that have been published on the internet, and also the Phil Steele and the Athlons and the Lindys and everybody else. So I've got the Dodds and the 40s in there as well, as we like to say, and the Schlebaws and the Futaks and everybody else has their 2 cents as well. So we're going to we are going to put that out in the next several days. But I just put out my top 25, and I can run through it real quickly. And
is it posted?
Yes, there's a link to it on our site. You may have to, scroll down a little bit under the football heading to find it. But I had Georgia number 1 using the Ric Flair corollary that to be the man, you have to beat the man, even though Stetson Bennett is no longer their quarterback. And they did lose a lot of guys off their last 2 championship teams. But that tight end Brock Bowers is tough. And, we'll see what their quarterback situation bears. The schedule is not difficult for them. They play South Carolina, which is an emerging team in the SEC at home. They have the rivalry game with Florida, which is just kind of treading water right now in Jacksonville. And then a visit to Tennessee, but obviously Hendon Hooker is no longer at Tennessee. Will they be able to keep their magic rolling with Joe Milton, the journeyman? Journeyman Joe Milton is the quarterback there in Tennessee. And, he did get he got to play in their bowl game and everything else. But, we'll see how he does. But then I've got Ohio State number 2. I just simply look at the fact they've got 5 first-round NFL draft picks. There's just too much talent on this team, and they don't have to take a backseat to anybody because of that. And I just think that they've got a tough schedule though. 3 road games that are just killers. Notre Dame, Wisconsin, and Michigan all figure to be just physical nut crunch type games. And pack your own guts, pack a lunch, bring a helmet and shoulder pads, because you're going to need it for those games. But I got Ohio State 2, then Alabama 3. The rumors of Nick Saban's demise, greatly overrated. They just continue to recruit really well. Tyler Buckner, is he going to be their quarterback? That's the big thing, coming in from Notre Dame, and they bring in Reese, the coordinator from Notre Dame. So those two are well accustomed to one another, and we'll see if that spells victory for them down there, although I've got them taking a back seat to Georgia in the SEC. Michigan 4. You've got a running back like Blake Corum and another one like Donovan Edwards. You can control a lot of football games, because those guys are going to rip off yards in 4, 5, 6, 7, 20, 30, 40-yard chunks. So stopping the run there and making J.J. McCarthy try and beat you with his arm, I think that's the way to go there. Lost some guys on defense. We'll see if they're able to maintain noted gun aficionado Mozzie Smith no longer over there on defense for the Maize and Blue. Then I've got LSU. I was very impressed with what Brian Kelly did in his first year. I know they did lose 4 games, but they to me, they've got Jayden Daniels back at quarterback, and I just think they're going to be right there neck and neck with Alabama. Got to the championship game last year in the SEC, so they know what it's like to win at a high level. But those are my top 5. I'll just tick them off after that. USC 6, Clemson, the best in the ACC 7. And a lot of that is because they are going to host Florida State in North Carolina. Those are 2 big games for them at home this year. Penn State, number 8. James Franklin, 10th season at Penn State, and still looking to break through that glass ceiling of Ohio State and Michigan, win the Big Ten East in the final year of the division play. We'll see if they can do that. I got Florida State number 9. They started to make some really big things happen at the end of last year. They haven't won the ACC championship since 2014. They won their last 6 games in 2022, and now with the quarterback Jordan Travis, we'll see how they do. Michael Penix, Heisman candidate, Washington, number 10. He threw for like 4,000 yards or something absurd last year, so we'll see if he can reprise some of that. Then 11, Oregon, 12, Notre Dame, who Ohio State has to visit Notre Dame. 13, Kansas State, 14, Utah, who I like. All they've done is win the Pac-12 2 years in a row, and Cam Rising is back at quarterback. Texas, 15. We were talking off the air. They were 8-5 last year. They always doink off 3 games somewhere along the way. Quinn Ewers and his mullet back for his second year as the Longhorns starting quarterback. He could be just that guy. They haven't won the Big 12 since 2009, last year in the league, going to the SEC. I doubt they in Texas and Oklahoma get many breaks from the Big 12 officials along the way. Just kind of file that back in your mind as you watch them struggle in Big 12 play. Tennessee 16, Wisconsin 17. I think Luke Fickell's going to go in there. They're going to win the Big Ten West in his first year. I don't think the roster's all that great. You got the running back Braylon Allen, but they do have Ohio State and Nebraska and Iowa all playing at Wisconsin this year. So those are huge, and they don't have to play Penn State or Michigan. That's maybe even huger. So there you go. Oregon State 18, got to like with Jonathan Smith. I mean, this guy, if there's been a coach of the last 5 years in college football, what this guy has done to take a team that used to only win 1 or 2 games a year, and they won 10 last year. That's incredible at Oregon State. And they got DJ Lele, the former Clemson quarterback there. North Carolina 19, Oklahoma 20. South Carolina 21, Spencer Rattler and Shane Beamer It's like McCartney and Lennon there in Columbia with the bang up job they did. Texas A&M, Jimbo Fisher, this guy, he's got talent, but they don't win many games. They were top 5, top 10 last year, ended up 5-7. He better have a good year. Let's just put it that way. Tulane 12-2, Texas San Antonio 11-3, and those are maybe the top 2 teams in the American. Whoever thought you'd hear that? Tulane and Texas San Antonio, the top 2 teams in the American, with all the defections off to the Big 12. And finally, rounding out my top 25, Lane Kiffin, Jackson Dart, the quarterback at Ole Miss, 8-5 last year. They were 7-0 before the wheels just fell off. Lost to Mississippi State at home. I mean, it was embarrassing, ugly, and disastrous. I don't have TCU in my top 25. I just think, I don't know, there might be some remnants from that 65-7 beatdown by Georgia. TCU is going to have to show me that they're going to be able to come back from that.
I don't have specific issues with any of that. My problem is more from a context standpoint, and I have issues with this making my own predictions because I'll bring it up like I bring it up all the time. There were 27 teams last year that had a 3-game swing in their record from the previous season. And that number's usually, and that's in the Power 5, just in the Power 5, which we're up to 69 teams in the Power 5. So 27 of them had a drastic move, and it's usually more like 18 to 22. So I have the same issue of finding who those teams are going to be because, Tony, I'll set you up with this. As you know, last year, more than half the top 25, the preseason top 25, didn't finish in the top 25. So do this exercise, folks. When the top 25 comes out, which I think Steve's top 25 is fairly close to what it's going to be, the AP top 25. I don't think it's going to be more than half the top 25. That was a bit of an outlier last year, but it's usually like 8 teams out of that top 25 will not finish in the top 25. So go find 8 other teams that will finish in the top 25.
Well, and you can usually find a top 5 SEC team that will not finish in the top 25 because there's one overrated in there somewhere. I don't know. I don't know if it's going to be Tennessee this year. I tend to think, like, looking at these rankings, again, I don't have a huge problem with any of it, and I would love to have a problem with all of it, Steve. I'm starting to feel pretty good about LSU beating Alabama this year and winning the West, but I know LSU will have to do that in Tuscaloosa. I'm not convinced about Alabama's offense right now. But when you're talking about removing half of these, that would be an interesting. Just check them off. Like, okay, well, we can remove Texas A&M, but like, shouldn't they be bouncing back at this point? Last year, now it's time to start to reap the benefits of buying a recruiting class, at least the half of them who are still there. And yet, who are Steve's also receiving votes teams that will jump up, and is it, a Vandy, not a Vandy, but, the teams that aren't in the rankings that will end up in the rankings, they'll go on a run. I'm interested to see what happens with Texas. I think like everybody is, they lost 5 games last year and they were favored in 4 of those 5. They were only an underdog once last year. And that was the Alabama game, and probably going to be something similar this week or this year. And I saw that the media picked them as the favorites in the Big 12, which is probably is that the dreaded show of support from the athletic director or the team president when you do something like that. And now Texas is definitely going to get fired. But yeah, I mean, if you scroll up and down that list and say who you're going to remove, like that's a great exercise. And that's the fun part is I don't know. And I noticed there's no Miami on this top 25 team, Steve, on this top 25 list. So are you saying the Canes aren't going to get it done this year?
They were everybody's, hot to trot team last year. And I think, they fell back. They didn't get it done. So I think a lot of people want to see them prove it on the field. They're tired of rating that team and that program and then having them lose to Duke or having them lose to North Carolina or Wake Forest or, whoever, just somewhere in the dog days of that ACC schedule. They fail to get it done. And fool me once, shame on you. Fool me 27 times, shame on me. And I think that, that's the problem with Miami is it's all talk and nothing quality comes out of there. It just never happens for them. So, they need to have a great year. I mean, it's been a revolving door of coaches since Larry Coker, 6-7 guys now in the last 20 years. And, Ohio State broke them on January the 3rd, 2003. They have not been the same since, obviously. So that's been 20 years and 6 months now. So, maybe one of these years they'll get it back and find a way to even win a conference championship. But, I had Iowa in my also ran pile. I had TCU in my also ran pile. I had Toledo, which is interesting. DeQuan Finn is back at quarterback at Toledo. We don't talk a lot about the MAC, but they play a game at Illinois as kind of their revenue game this year, which quite honestly, could be a winnable game for Toledo if DeQuan Finn plays like he's capable. And if that team can go 11-1 or 12-0, maybe they're looking at a New Year's Six bowl. Only one MAC team I think ever made it, and that was PJ Fleck at Western Michigan, went 13-0 maybe or 12-1, whatever it was, and got into the Cotton Bowl. And Minnesota, my goodness, PJ Fleck, they won 9 games last year, but, got some guys coming and going and different things, and we'll see if they can make some noise in the West. And Rule, has it been the coach? Has it been the players? Has it been, something in the heads of the players at Nebraska that has just consistently held them back? I mean, they're 3-9, 4-8, whatever, but they're like 10 points from being 8-4. It's just like they're right there every week and just find a way to lose. Does that change now that you've changed the coach? And do they sneak up on everybody in the West, last year, the West, and win the West? Nebraska, that would be a tremendous story for college football, for college football to finally return to Lincoln, Nebraska. That would be awesome. So, there's a lot of subplots out there this year. We haven't even touched on the Northwestern thing. 1-11 last year. Now this happens. Have a hard time believing they're going to win many games this year. And, I'm taking a wait and see on this. I think if what's been alleged is true and that Fitzgerald had any kind of inkling about it, then definitely, yes, he has to go. They say there was a whiteboard in plain view of everybody in the locker room with names of people who were in line to get this treatment, whatever it was. And there were varying different things that happened to these players. If he understood what the meaning of that was, then he's got to go. You cannot, this is 2023. And when are these knuckleheads going to realize that what passed for football in 1977 with Hazing and whatever, 1967 ain't going to pass in 2023, and particularly not when you're talking about the level of abuse. I don't think anybody was injured, but these people are emotionally scarred by what these people did to them, if everything we're being told is true. So you can't operate like this in 2023, and he paid for it with his job. And we're going to find out. We're going to get to the bottom of it, hopefully at some point, and find out how much he knew, what he knew. And, when they're sending screenshots of the whiteboard in full view in the locker room, which I have not seen, but our guy from Big ESPN, Big Ten, Chicago,
Adam Rittenberg.
Rit has said he's seen the picture, but he didn't publish it, probably because there's names on it. Then I have to take it at face value that it was there for everybody in the building to see. And if that's the case, it's got to go.
We talk about how difficult it is to win at Northwestern, except the last time they had a coach that couldn't win there was over 30 years ago.
Agreed. You can win there.
Yes,
You're not
people
going
talk about Pat Fitzgerald like he's done something miraculous, and he's not. He's followed up the two coaches prior to him that had similar success.
Now, moving away from the Big Ten West might hurt, though. Might hurt the opportunities to win. But Randy Walker didn't have a Big Ten West. Gary Barnett didn't have a Big Ten West. So I think, and what I've always been saying about Pat Fitzgerald for the last few years is one of my things I believe about college football. If you have bad offense, it's on purpose. And they've had a bad offense for a while. And you go back to Randy Walker and Gary Barnett, they didn't have bad offenses. They had, and they didn't have the talent to have good offenses, but they had the system to do it. And then they got some talent. Pat Fitzgerald has put no effort in offense the last 5 years or so. And they've won in spite of that at times.
Well, we are out of time, and I've got 2 to 3 hours on record of what I think of the whole deal. So folks, check out the live stream. But basically, to Steve's point, you don't do that in 2023 versus 1977 because of politics and culture. You don't do it because everybody's got a cell phone in their hand and everything can be recorded. And you also don't do it because it's wrong, regardless of whether it's 1977 or 2023. It's just horrible treatment of people. And you, on top of that, don't do it at one of the best journalism schools in the country.
That's the key. That's the key one right there, I think, Mark, is don't do it where they're taught to dig. And as I tweeted the other day, if you're a head coach, don't be more concerned about having plausible deniability than not making sure stuff isn't going on that's going to get you fired. Because clearly, plausible deniability, if you did have it, wasn't good enough. And no new information came to the president, but he went from a 2-week suspension to a firing. And that's the way the winds blow. And so don't put up the sails.
Yeah, the letter from the players said that the allegations were lies and twisted. So you're saying there was some form of hazing. They don't deny. They're not denying that. They're not saying there was no hazing. They've never said that. They said what was reported was lies and twisted. And then they said that Pat Fitzgerald had no knowledge of it. Had no knowledge of what? No knowledge of what? There's not supposed to be any hazing, dumbasses. Not supposed to be any hazing. You can't do that in 2023. We go to Ohio State's practice and a guy jumps off sides. They send him on a lap. They take a lap. It's dealt with right there in the moment, and it's over and done with. Do they have their own little special thing that maybe they do later on behind the scenes that we don't know about? Possibly. I don't know. But for them to say, that their letter spoke volumes to me. That something happened, something continues to happen, and then they're trying to cover for their coach because they want to keep the known as opposed for the unknown. There's going to be a lot more that comes out about this, I think, before we're all said and done. And, I like Fitzgerald. He's been, great for college football, in my opinion, overall, but you can't do those kind of things or allow those kind of behaviors. This is going to be a clarion call to the entire industry that enough with the bull crap. We aren't going to abide this stuff. You're not going to treat other people like this. If you are, you're the one who's got to go. So, that's what we got to come to.
I always wonder in situations like this, and not that this is a normal situation, but when players have done something that ends in their coach being fired, what kind of guilt goes along with that? How do they handle that? How do they deal with that? How do they process it? Because, that's why he's no longer here, is because what the players did. And now, of course, he should be responsible for that, and he's being held responsible for that. But it'll be interesting and probably a little uncomfortable at Big Ten Media Days talking to some Northwestern players and seeing how they handle it.
It was brought
up. I'm sure we're going to get the football questions only. That'll probably be the SID standing over their shoulder. One SID for each of them.
Yeah, we've seen that before. I forget which school had something going on where they basically had the SID, the deputy SID, and the assistant to the regional manager of the SID, like all with the 3 players, and just making sure that nothing was asked. I don't remember what year it was, but it wasn't the first time. Probably won't be the last time.
And I just saw a tweet that their football SID, I think, just left to go somewhere or something. Like there was a tweet, and I don't know if this was precipitated by this or what, but I have to go back and look. It kind of caught me off guard. Like, oh, this guy left in the middle of this crisis. Whoa, that's interesting. But
you didn't wait till Friday to announce it?
No. What a mess.
Absolutely. And what was brought up the other day as well, and I'll credit my guy Tony Altimore, because I wasn't going down this path. I was thinking coaching was what about the players in regards to their hand in this. Well, obviously they were the ones that were involved in the activities, and whether they're it's discipline beyond football, criminal lawsuits, those sorts of things, and then do they get disciplined? Do they get thrown off the team, dismissed from the program? And are they patchworking a football team together? I don't know if it even goes down that road as well. And we will send everyone off with Robert. We appreciate you being here. Cash money for Tony's bloviations.
Okay. I know big words. I can use
them. Tony, thank you for being here every week. We appreciate it. It's BuckeyeHuddle.com, everyone. Buckeye Weekly is the podcast. And Steve Helwagen, Bucknuts 247 Sports. And we'll see you all back next week.